On this episode, the actual photo is appearing on the staircase, and it looks like a child, and his eyes are glowing. Amityville always stuck out to me because it felt very real. They're experiencing cold spots in the house, which is very typical for any sort of ghost encounter. Apparitions popping up, those of a young girl, sometimes with a demonic pig with glowing eyes.
The whole Conjuring Universe is based off of the work of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Was the Annabelle Doll. So she receives this doll, and there's a bunch of strange occurrences happening. Then they start to see that it's got notes written on parchment paper saying, help us, or help me. These physical attacks during this seance where she's her body kind of contorts in all weird ways that aren't necessarily natural, and she's tossed along.
If there is a 1% chance of some of that being real, it's kind of worth probably staying away from.
In the dimly lit corners of the world where shadows dance and whispers linger, lies a realm that straddles the line between the living and the dead. Tonight, as the veil behind these two worlds thins on this haunting Halloween night, we delve into the phenomenon of ghosts and the elusive shadow people. Figures that lurk just beyond the periphery of our vision, elusive, mysterious, and perhaps all too real. Joined by the legendary tales of Ed and Lorraine Warren, the paranormal investigators who dedicated their lives to the unearthing of these secrets of the spectral realm, and the team from Ghost Hunters who brought these spine-chilling encounters into our living rooms. We invite you to explore the dark recesses of the unknown. So pour yourself a cocktail, dim the lights, and prepare to uncover the chilling truths that lie beneath the surface right here on Cocktails and Conspiracies. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Shane Squarick, here with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Phillips, in what he has dubbed his absolute favorite topic of all time. This is your show, baby.
I got my cock, I got my tail, I'm ready to rock. Oh, baby.
I really hope that doesn't catch on as your catchphrase. It's probably a little non-PG here. Cheers. Welcome back. I'm doing a little G&T tonight.
Cheers.
Well, it's really beer tonight. It's really a little gin and ginger, so probably better just gin and gin there. We're rocking some new gear here.
We are, dude.
Yeah. I don't know. The last episode we recorded, but I think that's going to come out after this one. So technically, we're on the Shame shirt, little Cocktails and Conspiracies gear here. We're looking good, we're looking fly.
The upgraded cotton, which is fantastic, might I add. If anybody wants to pick one up,
soft.
Dude, spend the $3. Upgrade to the better cotton, phenomenal.
I always encourage people to do that. It's just well worth it, in my personal opinion. But,
it's nice. But yeah, dude, this is going to be. I said it before we recorded. I said this is already my favorite episode. When we started talking about doing this, I immediately went paranormal. I love this shit. This is right up my alley.
Now, what's kind of... I'm interested in ghosts, too. I certainly love the topic, but I think my passion for this topic pales in comparison to yours. And I'm not saying that to be facetious. I've seen a couple episodes of Ghost Hunters, but I've not seen nearly the quality. You've watched every single episode a dozen times, right?
Multiple times.
What is it about ghosts that draws you in?
I don't know. I think it just stems from the first time when you're a little kid and you hear your first ghost story and I was just fascinated by it. And it scared the shit out of me. I've had some personal experiences, nothing crazy. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I've never, seen a full body apparition or anything like that, but I've had some weird shit happen. And I just think that if you kind of take a look at all the conspiracy stuff that we talk about and just kind of the taboo in general, I think the two things that are most likely to be real are probably ghosts and aliens. So to me, those two are just like, those are the big two for me, right? And for whatever reason, I just became fascinated, with the paranormal and with ghosts. And, you talked about it in your intro. Ghost Hunters came out back in like 2004. I remember watching it. It had to be around that time. And that show, I don't think it was on regularly at that point. It was kind of like on near Halloween around this time of year. And what I loved about it was, and we're going to dive deep into Ghost Hunters later, but what I loved about it on the surface was like, oh man, they're actually using some scientific methods and they want to debunk it. And to me, I was like, that's cool. Like, that's real. Again, we'll get into what's real and what isn't and how we feel about that stuff. But that just kind of captured me, and I've just loved it. I think it's cool. I've always wanted to actually go and do like a ghost hunt on my own. We've talked about it before. I would love to do it. I can't believe I'm almost 40 and I've never tried it. If anybody's out there, especially in the New Jersey area, drop us a comment, hit us up, let us know. We'd love to join you. I would personally anyway. I'd love it.
I think there's an inherent fear for me of going on a ghost hunt, much like the Ouija board, where it's, it seems like something I'd really be interested in doing. Like a Ouija board is a really easy one to prove and disprove. But if there is a grain of truth involved in any of it, I am mortified at the idea of conjuring some sort of spirit, pun intended, that is going to haunt the living hell out of me and turn my life upside down. I love this stuff. Yeah. That's why we started this journey, this conversational format that we're in, because we're interested in all sorts of conspiracy and stuff. But we don't want it to consume our lives, and that's where I kind of try to stay at arm's length from ghosts.
Did you ever play with the Ouija board or anything like that?
Never. I won't even touch it. I won't go near it. I wouldn't open a box. I wouldn't know one. No, because I'm mortified of the power of it.
Yeah, knowing what I know, I mean, as an adult, I don't think I would go play with one tomorrow. I did as a kid. I never had an experience with it. I think they're largely bullshit. But to your point, if there is a 1% chance of some of that being real, it's kind of worth probably staying away from.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, ghosts are largely... It's something that I do believe exists. It's something that I've never personally had an experience in, and we'll dive into that a little bit later as well. But I'm very much in alignment with all of the other aspects of the paranormal, from past lives or future lives, from spirit beings, being able to astral project. Like, I think these are all sort of tied together in some way or not. And even in the early episodes we did when we would have guests on, we kind of did like a 20 questions type thing format where we'd ask people, ghosts, what are they? Are they real? And part of the reason we stopped doing that is because the conversations from those questions really steered off into, it wasn't just a one-word answer that we were expecting.
No.
It steered off into another 15 minutes, and there was such passion.
Yeah. Well, at 15 minutes, we were lucky. I mean, we've had some podcasts go an extra hour because of that.
Well, funny you say that, because we actually had the astral projection episode that spun off, ended up being a derivative of something we had to cut out of another episode, because we just simply asked the questions, do you think ghosts are real? And the next thing you know, boom, boom, boom. And it went absolutely nuts. Let me mute my volume here on my computer that's beeping in. But probably the most famous, or I guess really infamous, paranormal investigators outside of the ghost hunters are Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
Most people's familiarity with them, I guess, is probably going to be from the Conjuring movies and that whole universe of movies, from Annabelle and such.
My
There's
favorite.
been a bunch of spin-offs.
Hands down, that is, like, for me, the best movies that have come out in a long time.
They are unbelievably great horror movies that turned some basic stories into an unbelievable $2 billion franchise. Which, from a horror movie perspective, you don't see that. Like, a $2 billion franchise for horror is unheard of. Most of the horror movies, they're cheesy and chintzy. Outside of, like, your Freddy Kruegers and your Friday the 13th and Halloween franchises, you really didn't have those big-time franchises. Even, like, the Chucky ones. Although it's franchised and people know what it is, or Hellraiser, those are all low-budget films that are probably not worth a whole lot. And even the Friday the 13th is not worth much. It's changed hands over the years. Even Halloween has changed hands over the years.
Yeah.
This is a massive franchise.
I think the time has something to do with it, too. A lot of those movies were older, and I think that it's just the way that business runs is a little bit different than it is today. But I mean, if you look at the quality, let's take away the storyline and the acting. Just look at the quality which those films were produced, the Conjuring Universe, and compare that to anything else. I mean, it blows everything else out of the water. I mean, And those movies, with the exception of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, still scare the shit out of me today. And I love
Nightmare
it.
4 is arguably one of the best. And then Wes Craven's New Nightmare is also really good. But I think the asterisk that hangs high over the Conjuring Universe series of films is the fact that they felt very real, and people would come to find out that they are based on true accounts of the Warren family. So, Mr. Phillips, this is your subject.
Yeah, baby.
For those that don't know who they are, who are Ed and Lorraine Warren?
Yeah, so Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were probably the most prominent paranormal investigators to ever walk the earth. They were known for working on some of the largest cases ever. You already talked about some of them. The whole Conjuring universe is based off of the work of Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Amityville Horror was inspired by them. Annabelle, which is in the Conjuring universe, the original Conjuring. The Enfield Poltergeist, which was Conjuring 2. These guys were huge in the 60s and 70s. Ed was a self-taught demonologist. Lorraine claimed to be a clairvoyant, which I don't personally love. I have a really tough time. I don't know how you feel about it. And no offense to anybody out there that feels as if though they have some kind of a unique ability. I think that kind of stems from I don't, and it's just very difficult for me to understand that. And look, there's a lot of people that just bullshit, right? So I struggle with that whole clairvoyant thing a little bit. They actually founded the New England Society for Psychic Research. They investigated thousands of cases, like over 10,000 cases. And their work inspired all these films. Having said that, they had quite a controversial career. A lot of skeptics criticized them for things like lack of scientific evidence. They accused them of fabricating or exaggerating cases, specifically for fame and profit. They were accused of exploiting vulnerable families and monetizing personal tragedies. Personally, I kind of look at it like, hey, if you are really doing this work and it's getting all this attention, well, why not make some money off of it? But on the flip side, are you making money off of it because of that? But that's basically Ed and Lorraine Warren.
I don't want to go too deep into that just yet, because there is a lot, and I think it can go on either side. And I think you're kind of hinting at the direction it is. We'll probably take this. I want to kind of jump back into some of the stories that were told. For me, one of the earliest horror films I remember seeing was the 70s version. I think it was 78, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look it up, of Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
That and House on Haunted Hill were probably the two earliest horror movies I ever remember seeing. With my father, huge horror movie buff, largely responsible for my infatuation with horror later in life. Amityville always stuck out to me because it felt very real in a number of ways. And I'll speak more towards the remake as well, because I know a lot of people saw that with Ryan Reynolds. Probably not the greatest movie in the world, but it captured the essence of the original. Effectively, the premise of the movie is this family, the Lutz family, moves into this house in Amityville, New York. The settings of it have changed based on the depiction of the film. Sometimes it's on a lake and whatnot, but the house does actually exist in Amityville, New York, which is Long Island. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, it's in Long Island.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about like a very affluent neighborhood now, and the house still stands there today in largely its original form. In essence, though, the story you see in the Amityville Horror movies is that this Lutz family moves in, and there's a bunch of weird shit that starts to happen throughout the piece of the house, or throughout these family living in the house.
Yeah,
you can take it directly from the movies if you want. The official narratives are a little bit different here, but for the most part, after they move in, they're experiencing cold spots in the house, which is very typical for any sort of ghost encounter. Obviously, a bunch of strange noises and this kind of undescribable feeling of dread. Again, if anybody's into the paranormal or ghosts, this is not unusual for what you might hear in any sort of ghost tale. What really starts to strike out differently is that there's these physical manifestations that start there as well. So they starting to see ghosts, apparitions popping up, those of a young girl, sometimes with a demonic pig with glowing eyes. Yep. They said that they saw furniture moving around. They heard doors slamming, and they would see green ooze seeping out of the walls. Constantly feeling this like oppressive presence in the house, which would subsequently make them very sleep deprived. So the father, George, would be waking up every single night at 3:15 in the morning, and we'll get into why that is in a minute. And obviously the sleep deprivation, if anybody's got kids, honestly, in those first couple of years, you're a little sleep deprived and you know what it's like to wake up and be pissed off at a lot of things. There you go. That kind of paints into it. So George starts getting very aggressive, very violent, which is uncharacteristic of who he is. There's some other details that have kind of been wishy-washy based on the movies and the original accounts, but that's effectively what it is. And they say that before they moved into the house, they were told of this series of murders that happened.
Right.
Or not series, it was more of a mass murders. Right.
Yeah.
There was the DeFeo family. The son was nicknamed Butch, and he effectively heard voices in his head and attested to that till the day he died in prison, and went around and executed everyone in his family with a gun while they were sleeping. Basically came home from the bar that night drunk, came into the house, killed everybody, including some younger siblings. And so this was expressed to the Lutz family as they moved into this house, which is probably just outside of their price range.
He was the original Chris Benoit.
Oh my goodness gracious. God damn it. Another good wrestling reference. We get some comments.
That's why I had to drop it.
Holy crap! This guy's even a wrestling fan. Wow, that was a tough one there. Holy shit! So the OG Chris comes in there, does all this stuff. So when the Lutz family, I can't get that out of my head. When the Lutz family is about to move in, they allegedly procure a priest to come in there and bless the house. They're not very religious people, but a little skeeved out, as I'm sure we all would be. And he denotes that one room upstairs. He got a really strong presence, and he heard the words "Get out," whispered, or I guess not whispered, like a whisper of it, but like a ghost apparition, effectively saying it to him, and warned the family, don't put a bedroom in that room, and try to avoid that as much as possible. So the Lutz family moves out. They move with some friends because a lot of crazy shit's coming in there. The Warrens basically come in there and they start to investigate the house to check out these malevolent spirits, conduct a seance in the house, which Lorraine supposedly made contact with the spirit of a deceased girl. They're basically, this whole series goes on for 28 days before they flee the house entirely. And obviously this case now garners massive attention. That's a really long-winded way to say that this is what captivated me the most about this story, because as my early exposure to horror, what are the things you look for? Obviously the jump scares and the build up, but there's always that idea that if this can happen in real life, in any horror film, right? Even Nightmare on Elm Street, which is my favorite series of all time. Could this happen in real life? Well, Nightmare on Elm Street, that's probably not happening, but maybe there's elements of it that could. The fact how Freddy Krueger becomes Freddy Krueger can certainly happen, which I do not want to discuss in here because that'll definitely be a shadow ban. But with Amityville Horror, I mean, we're talking about something that not only could happen in real life, but did. It's based on a true story. And anytime as a child I saw based on a true story.
Yeah. Especially with the original story, right? With the DeFeo family, like that 100% happened. What happened afterwards with the Lutz family, that's up for debate. But what happened with the DeFeo family, that was real.
That was very real.
And you and I have talked in the past about what kind of, like, you don't mind those, like, slasher flicks, right? Those kind of horror movies. I don't love them because to me, and look, serial killers exist. I get that, right? And I'm sure that there have been some serial killers in, somewhere in the world that have done worse shit that you could ever imagine or have ever seen in a movie before. I get that. But to me, just I don't know, man. The prospect that ghosts could possibly be real. There could be dark entities potentially disrupting someone's home and life. Like, holy shit, man.
You're going from one supernatural to the next, though. That's where it kind of blends,
Yeah.
The slashers, to me, like, if you look at Friday the 13th, right? What is that? It's about a kid that got picked on and bullied at a summer camp, accidentally dies, but let's just extract the idea that he dies, right? Maybe he just gets injured, he drowns and he's rescued or whatever, and it's traumatizing for him. And he comes back later, and the reason that he almost died, let's, again, erasing the death part and the supernatural ability of it. The reason this happens is because a bunch of good-looking, popular kids are out there screwing out, making out with each other, worried about each other. It's a campground, right? It's going to happen. People are going out there, they're having fun, the young kids. Well, now he decides to declare vengeance when he's going back there, and it's dark, it's mysterious. So the next time you go stay in a freaking log cabin or a tent, some motherfucker with a machete might come up and bat your head off. That's the crazy part of the slasher flicks. But I get what you're saying. Like,
no, I get it.
The idea of there's also a difference too. Like when you're looking at a slasher film, there's almost this confidence in a way that like I can get out of that. I can outwit this guy. I can outsmart him. In some cases, I can outmuscle him a little bit. Not all of them. You know, Jason Voorhees is a big dude. He's always been presented as jacked. You're probably not outmuscling him, but the guy, they walk all over the place. You can run, you can sprint, you can figure it out. Right. In the paranormal sense, though, these apparitions don't exist, right? And so if they're doing something to you, it's not like you can punch them in the face or slap them or push them off. Like, you go through them. Right. And I think that adds to the mystique, and why that becomes now a $2 billion franchise is because, to your point, in the back of your mind that this can happen to everybody, and we all know that it sort of lingers, the idea of ghosts, and it's not been proven nor disproven. But the fact that because of that, it lingers in the back of people's minds, and the fact that I think you can't do anything at all scares the living daylights out of people. Because what would you do? Yeah. Would you put the cover? That's always the go-to. Put the covers over your head, right? I hope it goes away. But think about it all the time. What does that actually do?
It does nothing.
You're hiding from a ghost that can see you and walk through the covers.
Yeah, look, I record this right now in my basement. When we wrap up and I go upstairs, you better believe my flashlight on my phone is going off, and I'm running up those stairs. I'm almost a 40-year-old man, but we're talking about this shit, and I'm running up those stairs, right? So to you, like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You know,
gosh.
If it wanted to be waiting for you at the top of the stairs, it's gonna wait for you there, right? You're fucked. So, you know.
Bringing us back to the Warren family, the big one that really inspired the first of the Conjuring films was the Perron family haunting. Do you remember what the basis of that story was?
Yeah, so there were certainly a lot of liberties taken with the Conjuring film, but it was at a farmhouse, if I remember correctly. I believe it was in Connecticut. I don't remember exactly where, but I'm almost positive it was in Connecticut. And it's a similar-ish story to the Amityville Horror. There were no gruesome deaths that occurred in the home prior to the Perron family. But the Perron family was essentially, for lack of a better term, tortured by some entities in the home. There was a seance that was actually committed there. At one point, it was speculated that, I don't know if speculate's the right word, but the mother, during the said seance, was actually levitated off the ground and thrown. And so that's really where that comes from. Like I said, the original story really kind of has nothing to do with the film, but it's all based on that.
Yes, I mean, it does nail on aspects of that. Bathsheba Sherman was the spirit that was allegedly killed in the house and comes back and is the one that becomes the spirit haunting the house. And then Carolyn Perron is the mother that experiences these physical attacks during the seance, where she's like, her body kind of contorts in all weird ways that aren't necessarily natural, and she's tossed along. What ends up happening, though, which is striking in the film, but also allegedly in real life, is that the father in the home, Roger, ends up knocking Ed Warren in the mouth. He just gets after this happens to his wife, he cold clocks. He doesn't want this to happen at all. He's worried that if you start doing the seance and you mess with these spirits, that it's going to piss everybody off and things are going to get worse. And he's kind of on the fringe the entire time, like, all right, it's a spirit, whatever, we can figure it out. We do some holy water in there. It is what it is. But that becomes striking. After this happens, obviously, all this stuff kind of stops and subsides more or less after the seance. Interesting one, because, again, this is something that happened in real life, and the hit across his face really did happen. And there is an audio recording out there of Roger Perron describing this and describing that his wife is contorted. And he gets up and he punches Ed Warren in the face, thinking that he's the one causing all of this stuff. I couldn't dig it up before we started this podcast. Maybe we can find it at some point during the midst of it. But it's interesting I did hear it myself. I've heard it actually very recently. It was on another podcast, so I don't want to clip through that, because it's going to be a pain in the ass. Yeah. But, it made for a really great movie, but the fact that it exists as a real story kind of, I don't know, it kind of lingers as an interesting one there.
Well, also, Bathsheba, I feel like I never pronounced that name correctly. I believe it's Bathsheba. I don't really know. I've watched and read a bunch of stuff on that and heard different people pronounce it different ways. It was actually a real person that lived in the area. I don't remember the time period. Could have been 1800s. She was... I feel like I could be getting this wrong, so somebody out there fact checking. I believe she was accused of killing her child and or some kind of negligence
Yes.
that led to her child's death. At one point, she was accused of being a witch, so she was a real person that lived in the area, somewhat close to the farmhouse that they grew up in. And that was where that whole character, if you will, comes into play. And when I say character, I mean, I'm not just talking about the movie, I'm talking about real life.
Right. So the other one from that unit, I mean, we can jump into Conjuring 2, which is the Enfield poltergeist thing, but the one that really stood out to me, one of the horror movies, and I think it was in one of the Conjuring movies first, I believe, was the Annabelle Doll.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, it was The Conjuring, and before Conjuring 2 came out, I believe Annabelle came out, and then it was Conjuring 2, and then it was Annabelle Creations. I could be getting that wrong, but I think that's how it went.
Right.
But you are correct, It's the same universe. Because it's all connected to Ed and Lorraine.
Oh, right. It's all connected to Ed and Lorraine. So the Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann doll. So Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Auntie, for those that are about our age, you probably heard of them. So we're not talking about like a very unique doll that was all custom and whatnot. It was quite literally a doll. But it was given to a nursing student named Donna in the 70s. Again, just a Raggedy Ann doll. So she receives this doll, and she's living in a home with, it's two women and a man. I forgot what their actual relationship was amongst themselves. And they bring this doll home, and there's a bunch of like strange occurrences happening. Basically, the doll's moving around the house. It'd be in one position, and they get home, and it's all of a sudden another position. And then they start to see that it's got like notes written on parchment paper saying, help us, or help me, which again, they're attributing to the doll. So the two women that are in the house now, the nurses believe that it's trying to communicate with them. The man that's living there, again, adamantly against this stuff, has experienced a little bit himself, but he's just like, back off. Don't get involved with this stuff. Like, he doesn't really think much of it. In any case, they decide to consult with a medium, and the medium comes in and decides again to hold a seance against the wishes of this man. So the two women are doing this on their own. The medium connects with this spirit that is allegedly possessing this doll, and the spirit tells them that she is of a young girl that was neglected and died, and all she's looking for is for somebody to love her and care for her, and asks permission to stay. Anybody that's done anything in spirits or knows anything about spirits in the past, if they're invited, they are not going anywhere. And of course, appealing to their motherly instincts, the nurses agree. The spirit is named Annabelle Higgins. So Raggedy Ann, Annabelle. Kind of similar. In any case, not far off. Yeah, it's very interesting that the names were that close. In any case, after the seance, the occurrences now intensify, and the doll becomes significantly more active, and we'll dive into this a little bit more later with some of the shadow people stuff, but there's this like phenomena that happens sometimes when people encounter spirits where they become very violent, and it feels like they're choking them out or they're putting pressure on their chest. And you're starting to get, it's not just like things happening around the house or seeing visions. It's now like physical violence towards you. And so this stuff starts to happening. They're seeing the doll move, they're feeling it, they're having things shouted at them, and it's getting really aggressive. That's when Ed and Lorraine Warren are called into this situation and basically determined that this doll lied, or the spirit lied that was possessing this doll. And it is not, in fact, that of a child, but that of this major malevolent spirit that is trying to kill them, a demon. Fast forward a little bit, effectively, the Warrens' goal is to take this thing out of the house. And in the midst of trying to do so, it's when they have it in the backseat of the car, Ed Warren had cautioned, don't drive on any major highways. And the cars are losing control because the doll is like using its spiritual powers or demonic powers to basically change the steering, steer the car off the road, kill the brakes so the brakes weren't working. And there's a story that, Ed had to throw holy water in its face, and that allowed him to transport it safely. That doll still exists in a glass case in the Warrens' museum in their house of all of their demonic items, with a big glass in a glass case with a big wooden plaque on there, or whatever plaque that says do not open this under any circumstance. I forgot the exact terminology.
It almost looks like a mini church that they have her in. I'm sure you've seen it. It looks like a mini church. It's weird.
Yeah, it's very wild. Ironically, just a couple days ago from when we're recording this, so it's probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago from Halloween night when you all are seeing this, they did move the doll and they took it out of the case and they put it into a new case. I guess they had to clean it or maintain it or whatnot. And there was this big thing about it, how they went through the process of it. It's interesting because that is, again, it's a doll from a TV show that everybody knew, Raggedy Ann and Andy. It was a very popular doll, and this one just happened to be possessed.
It's like a real life Chucky almost.
Bingo. And so that's what I wonder. I don't know if this is a direct correlation. Was this the inspiration for what would eventually be the story of it? What would eventually become Chucky?
I would love to know that. I would love to know that. You know, one of the things that I find interesting, right, that you touched on was the fact that, you know, Lorraine comes into contact with the spirit and finds out that it is this girl, Annabelle Higgins, that's possessing this doll. And there's a school of thought out there that anything that's really talking to you from the other side, from a spiritual perspective, is never a good thing, right? And I think that you have to have a little bit of a religious tone to it, and the reason why that is that if you believe in the afterlife, you know, you're not going to be around to have communications like that, especially to say the things that the spirit of Annabelle Higgins said, right? You know, she just wants to stay, so on and so forth. And so I just kind of find that piece of it interesting. What do you make of that?
Well, so within religion there, it's worth noting that Ed Warren was the only recognized demonologist by the Catholic Church. So when they had these instances, they would refer people to Ed Warren. Now, at this point, before the Amityville incident goes on, they are small potatoes here. They're basically knocking on doors to try to find hauntings. You know, nobody really cares about them. And this gives them public press, which is what you alluded to earlier. What ends up happening, though, as they pick up the steam and they get more noticeable, these instances do kind of increase a little bit. I think I'm a little split, and I don't think I totally agree with you there, because again, you're, as a ghost believer, I do believe that there is a position or a space in between life and death. And I think what I've accepted as spirits, religious or not, is that you can't cross over. Mm-hmm. Generally, spirits are attached to something traumatic. And even demons, where do demons lie? Demons lie in trauma, right? They usually appear when something traumatic happens, or when there's high levels of stress, or people are vulnerable. That's how when you look like exorcisms and how the possessions have always happened, which is another great episode we can go in down the line.
Oh, yeah.
It's always somebody that is vulnerable to them, that is weak. You always see that happen. And so my inclination is, because of that, you look at the DeFeo situation that happens in that household, right? You've got an absolute lunatic that comes in there and he slaughters his whole family. Well, the young kids just might not, they're maybe not ready to cross over into the next life, into the afterlife, into heaven, into hell, whatever it might have you. When you have these demons that come in there, they're there to influence you. They're not necessarily the crossovers. So the spirits that are there, the demons are there to lie to you, but the spirits, the good spirits that are there, they're just trying to figure out how to get out of here. Sometimes you've heard instances, and this is like really accented in The Sixth Sense, the movie, which is, again, not based in real life, but the concepts were derived from spirituality and religious accounts. They don't know that they're dead, or they realize it and they're not totally putting it all together, and they just need sort of that guidance to get there. In the instance of like the Annabelle doll, the way you present it as like, I was never loved, in the spirit realm, right? You have somebody like Lorraine Warren that comes in there, and if she is clairvoyant, they have dealt with all these things. They allege to have done 10,000 cases according to them. And when you've experienced this, you know that if there is a spirit there that maybe is a child, maybe all they needed was to be loved. And if you show them that affection for a day, for a week, for a month, they're gone and they move on and you'll never see them again. And there have been accounts in the past that have done that. So that's where I think that like that limbo state does exist. If they're talking to you, is it bad? I don't know that that's the case, because you often also hear, ask them what they want. Because sometimes just acknowledging them will let them go away. I've never had an encounter, and I'm not looking to invite the encounters either, so I don't want to find out and test the theory.
I'd like a residual encounter. I don't know if I'd want an intelligent one.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in passing, if I saw it and I wasn't at my own house and it wasn't coming home with me,
Yeah.
that'd be cool. But the you touched on it earlier. The Warrens are marred in conspiracy. Is
Yeah.
probably a great word to use given the context of this podcast, because
I like that word.
it's a great word, and that's a good cue for a cocktail here. A sip.
Sláinte.
As you pointed out, as they gain some popularity, what ends up happening is there's a bunch of media coverage. They're going on talk shows, they're getting picked up by the news. Their area of expertise, and I use that word kind of loosely, is now being looked at in an accepted lens. Not unlike how aliens are now being looked at today, where people are acknowledging it and addressing it. People were afraid of ghosts back then. They're still afraid of them today, but it was always still on the fringe, and now it becomes popular culture. In the midst of all this, they start to create books, and they're creating book deals. And that's where it starts to lean in. They're giving lectures, right? Which, even the lectures I can understand to a degree, because, right, like, you have an expertise in a field that's sort of off-kiltered.
Sure.
How do you approach that? How do you monetize your hobby here? Because a lot of these people really can't afford to pay you. You're going in there and doing a service. You're a professor, and you see that a lot with all these other fringe type things too. People are professional, and they become something else as sort of a side. I want to look at each of the main cases that we pointed out here, starting with the Amityville Horror, because that's my favorite one. Mm-hmm. The Amityville Horror. What happens with the DeFeo, with Butch, is that, and I forgot what his real first name is, but his nickname is Butch. That's how he's referred to. Is it Anthony?
Anthony, yep, Anthony DeFeo.
Okay, so Anthony DeFeo, he's in jail, and he, obviously hires an attorney to plead insanity, and they're making their insanity case there. So the Lutzes move into the house. What ends up happening, or supposedly happening, is the lawyer from the Anthony DeFeo case approaches the Lutzes, finds out that the Lutzes are a little bit in financial distress. They bought this house and they probably can't afford it, and they're going to struggle to make ends meet here. And so he approaches them saying, listen, my guy's telling me that, he's heard all these voices in this house and it's driving them crazy, whatnot, so on and so forth. He decides that if we approach you and we set up this story in the house that after you move in, you're going through all of this stuff, you're going through all of these experiences, there could be money for you too. We can write a book deal, maybe come out with a movie, so on and so forth. You can get out of there. It'll bail you out of the financial stress you're in there. You make a couple bucks off it, and it helps me confirm my case in the court, so this guy gets tossed in a psych ward instead of being hung up in a jail cell for the rest of his life. Becomes interesting. It adds up because they were in financial distress. There's no tangible evidence, so to speak, that, green ooze was coming out of the walls or anything like that.
Right.
There is a very famous photo of a child appearing in the window with like glowing eyes of the Amityville house. That's probably one of the most famous photos of all. Do we have that photo? Can we pull that one up?
I'm sure you can. I think that might have been used on one of the remakes too.
They definitely copied it. Amityville photo, child eyes. Let me see if I can pull that up. Yeah, okay. I've got the photo here. I'm going to pull it up for you guys here. Open image, new tab. Let's get that image. Good old-fashioned Reddit. All right, so there's this like super famous photo, and as always, apologize to the folks that are actually just listening to this, but effectively, in the movies, they use it like sitting out of a window. The actual photo is appearing on the staircase, and it looks like a child, and his eyes are glowing, right? Super freaking creepy. This is a very real photo that was taken. Now, there's context to this, is when the Warrens came to the Amityville house, the Warrens came with a film crew with the intention that they were going to film all of this stuff and they were going to try to monetize this venture they're going on. Again, I have no issue with that because if you are in this space, you're not making any money. And it's great that you're trying to help people navigate demons. You got to pay the bills sometimes, Tim, right? Like it's at some point,
you do, sir.
the piper's going to come calling. What ends up coming out is that this photo is very real, but this guy is one of the guys from the film crew. He just happens to look young, and he peered around the corner. He was setting something up. They snapped a photo of him, and just the refraction on the lens just happened to change his eye color that way. He looks like a young boy, and he happens to hold a very similarity to John DeFeo as a young boy as well in terms of his looks. It's not him. John DeFeo was the young brother that was killed, and I'll pull up his photo too, just so we can take a look at what that looks like. So here's a picture of John DeFeo, a little smaller here, but I mean, there is resemblance there where that kid does kind of look like John DeFeo here. Again, I say kid, but this is actually a guy who just happens to be like leaning out. He's scrunched down a little bit here.
It is wild how young that guy does look.
Right, and listen, he could have been like 19 years old. We don't know.
Right, exactly. Also, you got to take into account this was done in what, the 70s, right? So the cameras were a little bit different. It's the lighting, so there were variables to look at there.
There's a lot of variables here. They have come out and admitted that this photo is fake, but because it's so iconic, people just sort of dismiss it and leverage this as the anchor for the story. But the fact the Warrens came in there and they were ready to go, rip-roaring ready to go to effectively record this thing, does strike me as interesting. Yeah. As it turns out, the Lutzes do not strike a deal with this attorney. Apparently, as legend goes, they did not like the cut that they were supposed to get. They approach another offer where they're going to get a 50-50 split. They create a book, 2 movies, make money in the long run of it there. But they are out of the house. There's never been a claim of the haunting ever since, and we said right at the top. House is still occupied. It's been occupied ever since. Yeah. For all intents and purposes, that story is debunked. There's been no solid evidence of it. Which now, Tim, does that change your opinion on the Warrens?
Look, is it possible that the Warrens fabricated some things so that they could make money in their profession while most of their other cases were real? It's very possible. Could it be that they were full of shit on everything? Very well could be. I do find it very odd that, to your point, the house is still occupied today, and there have been no other claims of any other kinds of activity in the home. To me, that's very odd. Then when you couple in all the financial gains from this story, it just smells fishy and raises some red flags.
The financial struggles and then the financial gains. Okay.
Exactly.
What I also came to find out is that the Warrens weren't actively called to a lot of the cases that they went to, and Ed's claim of 10,000 cases doesn't really add up in terms of time. Like, they have to do a case
mathematically, it's impossible. It's impossible.
Right. Ed was known to embellish a lot, which again doesn't make all of what he's saying false. I'm not saying that at all, but he has been known to embellish quite a bit. I'm going to jump past what the Conjuring was based off of. I'm going to jump past the Enfield one as well. I want to go right to Annabelle, because this was the most striking for me. Mm-hmm. You said, we talked, it was Chucky inspired by Annabelle, right? Mm-hmm. What is Annabelle? I guess a better question is, was Annabelle inspired by something else? Are you familiar with a show called The Twilight Zone?
Of course I am. Old show from the 60s, right?
The Twilight Zone has been notorious for inspiring horror movies of all kinds over the years. It really set the bar for everything. There was an episode of The Twilight Zone called The Living Doll in November 1st of 1963. The episode centers around a young girl named Christy who receives a talking Tina doll as a gift from her mother. The doll is charming and seems harmless, but soon exhibits unsettling behavior. It expresses a strong attachment and displays protective demeanor. And as the story unfolds, it becomes clear the doll is harboring sinister intentions. Effectively, the story of Living Doll from the Twilight Zone lines up identically, almost word for word, as the story of the original Annabelle doll.
Really? I'm learning about this for the first time right now as we speak about this.
The ringer of the entire story is that the mother named in the Twilight Zone episode is...
Tell me it's
Annabelle. It's Annabelle. It's Annabelle. So, I mean, if you watch the Twilight Zone episode and then you read the account from the Annabelle story, Ed Warren was a huge admitted Twilight Zone fan as well. It is identical. Again, girl attachment. The doll starts moving around the house, and then all of a sudden it starts making threats, and then all of a sudden it's demonically possessed. It is aligned identically, and so that effectively debunked the Annabelle one. The other ones that came through all tied into the same basic thing. With the Enfield one, which is why I really didn't touch on that too much. The kids, the children of the home, this is the poltergeist issues. The kids in the home were caught basically manipulating things to make it look like something was happening all the time. So that kind of debunked it there. I don't discredit the idea that potentially they did encounter some crazy things, right? And we're going to talk ghost hunters in just a minute here. But I do question how much they started to embellish it when they would land in places, because a lot of the similarities between these families was always financial distress, right? They'd immediately write a book and they'd immediately try to, get it out there and try to monetize it. And there have been instances where they've approached homes, they went there, and people have come out and said this before. I don't have the names on top in front of me right now, but people have come out and said, they approached us and they wanted to kind of basically massage a story. The author to a lot of the books, his name was John something. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Oh gosh, I wish I could find the line here. The author, it's going to bother the heck of me, effectively comes out later on and said, I mean, he admits that he embellished quite a bit of it, but what Ed Warren would always seek out is he wasn't looking for, autobiography authors or documentary authors or anything. He was looking for horror writers. Those are the people that were writing his books. And the one guy comes out and says point blank that, he's like, I'm talking to these guys and I'm interviewing them about what's going on with their families, and their stories are so wacky and out of their mind. And Ed says to him, well, a lot of the people that call us are a little crazy and they're a little out of their mind. Whatever, write down what you can get from them, put it together, and whatever doesn't make sense, just make it up. So Ed knows that he's trying to go into Hollywood eventually. He's trying to create films. He's trying to create books. He's trying to create this media empire to basically fund himself there. Again, I don't think that's okay. I don't think it's a problem, right? You're taking real accounts that happens in Hollywood all the time. But for a guy that's been kind of caught red-handed multiple times embellishing, it becomes a little bit questionable. Tim, who's Judy Warren?
Judy Warren? I actually don't recall who Judy Warren is off the top of my head. Tell me who Judy Warren is.
This is where things get really, really crazy. Judy Warren is the adopted child of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, so she was a young girl that they took in, basically coming from a group home. And she moves in with them, and apparently this happened quite a bit. Quite a few people moved in, and they set up her own space and stuff. And she's on record at saying that, sometimes Ed would sleep upstairs, sometimes he would sleep downstairs. There are speculations that Ed had some affairs with her as she was a child, as young as 15 years old. And she has also come out on record that Ed was very abusive towards Lorraine, mostly psychologically abusive, belittling her, and Lorraine was very reliant on him, but potentially physically abusive as well. Ed had a very alpha personality, sometimes had a ponytail wrapped up there too, so that kind of tied into the alphaness of him. But not even a reaction out of that one, Tim?
That makes all the sense.
I thought a coupling out there would do something here.
I almost fell off my chair. I had to really hold myself.
So, there's a lot of question marks that surround Ed as a character. Judy still is alive today. She sort of distanced herself from the whole family. She won't speak ill on them, wants to kind of do her own thing. And they took her in, they gave her life, a life worth living is her words, almost identically. So the unfortunate part, I think, a lot about what Ed and Lorraine did is I think too much of it was embellished around kind of the seams. And I think that kind of discredits a lot of what their legacy really became. Museum that they have there, Tim, I don't know that anything in there is even haunted. but I'm sure shit not going to go in there and start calling out that doll and seeing if she follows me home.
And like, it's not worth repercussions if even one of them is true. It is. So I agree with you there. To your point, there's too much stain on their name to really look at their body of work and just believe all of it. Yep. But we say this all the time when it comes to people that have had UFO encounters or maybe an encounter with some kind of cryptozoological animal, right? If 1% of those people is true, or I should say, if 1% of the stories are true, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. And again, I can't emphasize enough on the monetization aspect of it. The people that do this stuff, and you see it today with like Ancient Aliens popping up and stuff, it's not that these people weren't researching this stuff and dedicating their lives to it. They just weren't making any money doing it. They had to do 1,000 other things. And so sometimes you grab onto an idea and you just kind of twist it. So maybe there is. And we've talked on this podcast a lot about people have no problem finding one hole in a perfect story and discrediting its conspiracy, and then finding a million holes in the official narrative and accepting it. There's a lot of holes here. I'm not saying that's not true, but I don't want to take it away from ghosts. Hollywood and ghosts is a perfect segue to ghost hunters.
Absolutely.
We talked about it when it was created, Tim. What's your draw to ghost hunters? I know you wanted to bring this up tonight. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I've watched one or two episodes.
Absolutely, right? So, I already talked about why I love ghosts, and it kind of captivated me from an early age, and it kind of goes back, and something I was thinking about after, we kind of spoke about at the beginning. My grandmother gave me, who's a devout Catholic, when I was very young, maybe 5, 6 years old, she gave me a prayer book. And in that book, there's a picture that depicts St. Michael the Archangel defeating the devil, right? And he's standing on top of the devil, and the devil is kind of green in color, and he's got these horns, and he's got this tail, and that scared the ever-living shit out of me. I think I still have it. It's got to be somewhere. But as a kid, that really, really frightened me, right? And then when I learned about the paranormal and demonic possessions, and I kind of linked the two together, and I think that's kind of where that fascination really comes from. But fast forward to 2004, the show Ghost Hunters comes out. Jason Hawes, Grant Wilson, they were buddies. They formed something called TAPS, which stands for the Atlantic Paranormal Society, back in the 90s. They, throughout, from the 90s through 2004, they are similarly doing to what Ed and Lorraine are doing, barring the whole clairvoyant thing and things of that nature. They are taking the approach of, hey, we're going to be as scientific as we can with this. We're going to use different kinds of devices, EMF detectors, lots of different things, and we're going to go in and help people and really try to debunk what they are experiencing, right? And, when we say debunk, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Not to say, oh, Mr. or Mrs. Client, you're crazy, right? But it's more so like, hey, like, you keep hearing this noise, well, guess what? Your heat kind of kicks on, and, it rattles a little bit, and that's what it is. And I'm using a very simple term for it. But to answer your question, to me, that was the draw, right? That was the draw, was the fact that they went in with the intent to debunk most, if not all, of the encounters that their clients were experiencing. And I love that because, to me, that it made it that much more authentic and made it real. And that's what really got me hooked on it.
I mean, the name isn't quite as striking, but I mean, the ghost realists, it's not the conspiracy realists, but, you get the idea. I think that's a great approach to it, and is... I want to say that's influencing the way we do our podcast, but I think that's the approach that we try to take here as well. Not to the same degree, obviously, but I think that's what allows people to gravitate to it and why the show has been so successful with, was it 10 seasons now? 14 seasons? I mean, you said it was 2004?
I think it's even more than that. It stopped in 2000.
So it might be 20 seasons now. Oh, okay. It's over now. It's not still on.
No. But
I know there's been like spin-offs and stuff.
There's been Ghost Hunters International. There was Ghost Nation. I mean, there's been a ton of spin-offs. Yeah. Grant is no longer on the show. He left, I want to say, in 2012. I could be wrong on the date, but to your point, it's been around for a long time.
So that's what I think draws people in, is if you take this skepticism approach and try to eliminate all the possible that's a quote actually. If you eliminate all the possible, what's left is the improbable, right? And so that's the idea of ghost. If you just go in to every haunting and just say, "Yep, there's a ghost here," blah blah blah, and create a TV show like that, people are going to tune out probably by the end of that first season because they know every episode you're going to find ghosts. But when you start to leave the door open for the potential that, like, all right, well, we're debunking this one. This was probably just an old radiator or whatnot. There becomes a draw, and there I think becomes a development of trust. On the idea of trust, you hinted at it earlier that they use a scientific method, and it's probably not scientific in the way that people listening or like YouTube would want it to be, or like if with the CDC and a virus or something, how they'd want to describe scientific with studies. But what it is just tangible methodologies that have become accepted for this space. So like electromagnetic field meters, EMF readers, very commonly known as digital voice recorders, infrared thermometers, and thermal imaging cameras, night vision cameras, full spectrum cameras. Then they create what's called like spirit boxes, which are really date back to the early ghost hunting days, used not as much as anymore, and a bevy of other pieces of technology. But the idea here is that they're using high-end technology, the best that we have available to us, to effectively pick up audio, dissect the audio to see if there's anything else out there that maybe the frequency of our ears can't pick up on, and then use different variations of cameras to pick up on heat signatures, to pick up on movements that might not be obvious to the naked eye or that are obvious to the eye, and see if that's been manipulated. It's, again, is it scientific? Debatable, but it is tangible evidence that you can now take and present forward and say, we looked at this area. If it was a radiator, you wouldn't see this anomaly in the heat here. Could that be just a screw up in the drywall and the way that the wall is sealed off? Sure, that could totally be an example too. But at least now you're eliminating all those highly possible things.
Yeah, I think on the surface it's as scientific as you can get in this space, right? Because really,
yes,
I mean, we're talking about something that is quote unquote otherworldly. So how do you really scientifically prove it, right? I mean, you could take, if you want to talk about physics, right? I mean, there are true methods, right, through mathematics and physics to prove specific theories, right? Well, we're talking about something that hasn't yet been proven. So how do you really scientifically prove it? There's really no one true proven way to do it, but on a very surface, tertiary level, that's not the right word, on a surface level, it's the best you got.
I mean, if you want to talk about physics, most of the concepts in physics aren't even remotely proven. They're theories, right?
True.
There are some, but like string theory is a concept. It's not remotely proven, and it can't be proven as the best we know. So this, again, while it is not scientifically proven, it does at least give you analytics to follow, and if nothing else, it's not some Joe Schmo, right? And it's enough where I think it's become sort of the standard across ghost hunting, and I think it's widely accepted at that point where most people are going in and doing that. Maybe somebody will come up with a better idea somewhere down the line, but that's going to involve like capturing a ghost like Ghostbusters and being able to analyze it from there, right? Like it's going to be hard to do that. So now I hear like a little buzzing in your background.
Yeah,
we got a ghost. We got a ghost coming in here?
Dude, maybe I shouldn't have fucked with that Ouija board when I was 11.
Maybe. Is something going on behind you, Tim?
I don't know. I don't know where to look.
It went off and then went back on again. I don't know if you're doing that
camera
purposely for here. Using one of these methods exclusively
could just be my air conditioner.
It probably is your air conditioner, my guess. But it sounds better if it's a Halloween episode, guys. It's a ghost. But using multiple of these methods in conjunction with each other is what they're doing to try to reinforce some of the evidence. That's where I think they've gained a lot of credibility, and where a lot of ghost hunters are now gaining credibility. Again, we are on a TV show that, for all intents and purposes, ran for about 20 years on and off, but it's been going for 20 seasons. Are there embellishments?
There has to be, right? I mean,
it's got to be.
And that's what... And I've mentioned this to you, right? Because you've never watched the show. And what did I tell you? I said start with the early seasons, which isn't a wacky theory. Because if you're going to start watching a show, you're going to start with the early seasons, right? But I say that because, to me, the early seasons, if you're going to embellish, there's going to come a point in time throughout the history of the show where there's so much influence from producers and from a network to make things happen that you're gonna cave and say, okay, fine, we could make it, do some fancy Hollywood editing and make it look like, when I asked this question, that flashlight, lit up, even though it didn't really lit up at that exact point in time, but you could edit it to make it look like that, and, we'll just throw it in there.
Yep.
So I think over time it becomes a little bit easier, and that influence and that pressure to embellish, to keep the show going for whatever reason it might be, most notably, probably monetary reasons, right? But the early episodes to me hold a little bit more true. And look, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe the early episodes are the big embellishments because it's like, hey, we got to get this bitch kicked off. I want to make some money making the show. Maybe I'm wildly wrong, but I like to subscribe to the theory that the early episodes were the ones that were a little bit more truthful. And for anybody that's a fan of the show and that has watched every season, you know that the earlier seasons, there was a lot more debunking. I mean, there were some episodes where they didn't find any paranormal activity at all whatsoever, and they were able to literally take, a list of claims that, homeowners or whoever it might be were encountering, and they were able to literally find what was causing all of those claims. So again, that's, for me, that's why I always say I really gravitate towards those early ones.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, you look at all reality TV across the board. I mean, I was a big fan of Big Brother for a period of time, and I've fallen off. I don't watch it anymore, but I went back and I started watching the first couple seasons. And when I came in, it was like, Big Brother like 17 or something like that. So it was years later, but those first couple seasons were so bland compared to the season I watched. But it was interesting because it was the raw concept. It was taking a bunch of people from different backgrounds. It didn't matter what they were from, just throwing them in a house and see what happens. And what it eventually becomes is this like curated process where the casting is casting a specific character. And of course, they got the diversity thing going on, but like you need to get like the ditzy blonde, you need to get like the super jock, you need to get like the older kind of like creepy overweight guy, but he knows how to cook, the motherly figure. And like you start casting for these roles, and then like the competitions become very like curated, where like the guy that's the person that looks like they're guaranteed going to get voted off the show, all of a sudden the competition is like super in their favor, and they get the veto and they come all the way back and they win and they get somebody else out because it creates drama. Right. Same thing. I mean, Naked and Afraid is another big one I love to watch.
Exactly.
Right. Like early episodes of that, like it was, people would be tapping out all the time. Now the newer episodes, like just as the brink of tapping out, they find this like dead fish that washed up on shore just coincidentally, or they get this huge score, and like, yeah, you want drama, you manufacture drama, and that's how shows go on. So I think you're right with that, is when you're starting a show, especially a ghost show, you can go and you can hit the notable ghost spots, the haunted spots that everyone comes into, and you can debunk them right away, or you can endorse them depending on, how impactful they are in the show. As it becomes later and you start getting in sponsors, and maybe some of those notable places say like, hey, we got a lot of money coming in here. If you come in here and debunk this, it's going to fuck our business up. So we'll throw you some cash to do a show here, because then we'll get noticed. Bar Rescue is a great example of doing that, where they go into good bars, they just kind of elevate it a little bit, but then they got good staff to run it, and it just brings more attention in there, right? So it's like you kind of just help each other out.
Damn it, I love that show too. Fucking John Taffer.
Yeah, oh yeah, I love Bar Rescue, but again, the latest episodes are such a sham. They're so scam. They're so terrible. The early ones though, they were literally just it was just pandemonium, and people were actually douchebags. Yeah, it was shitholes that were getting fixed, and then you had to see like, are these people really worth it to last? And but the idea, I think, is there. Anything on television is always with skepticism.
Right.
The concept of ghosts is not new, and that's where I think it's important. It's not like this popped up with the advent of reality television. We're talking thousands of years. Ancient civilizations, they talked about ghosts. They read them on the sides of walls in ancient Egypt, in Greece. They believed in spirits, and they believed in the afterlife. And this is what I was alluding to earlier, Tim, when we talked about our beliefs in ghosts, is I've always thought they were somewhat tied to that spiritual afterlife aspect of it. Mm-hmm. To what degree, I don't really know. I don't know. I really don't. And for those that are long-time listeners to the podcast, I've obviously dealt with a lot of death within my immediate family. And within my household too, by the way. Like both of my parents passed away in my house. So if there's an opportunity to haunt, hello, here we are. And my daughter's had some moments when she was younger that I thought maybe she was talking to my mother or somebody similar. She alluded to that because she knew who my mother was without ever encountering her.
And without you ever telling her who she was.
Right, correct. I never explained to her who she was. When she started seeing pictures, that's Grandma Donna. I'm like, what the? Like, my wife nearly fell to the floor when my daughter said that. Yeah. Could she have heard it in context? Of course. They were really young, though. It's not the type of age where you pick things up that quickly. We don't have the young mind words. But I've never, in the midst of that, I've encountered my parents. I talked about this in our afterlife episode, or our astral projection episode, where I've encountered them in dream states. I'm very good with lucid dreaming. I can kind of do it on command at this point. I've had personally some like psychic-ish manifestations in almost a way, but I've never encountered a spirit in any sort of a conscious state. A wokeful conscious state, and I hate to use the word work, awakened conscious state. Yeah. But you said you've had an experience.
Kind of. So I've never seen a full body apparition. I've never had a conversation. I've never had an experience that has given me the strength to say that I have definitive proof that ghosts exist, right? But I have had an experience. I lived at one point in a very old home. It was over 100 years old. And I was I think I was about 14 years old at the time. And I'm on the phone with a girlfriend. And this is back in the days of cordless phones, right? Anybody younger than us has no idea what a cordless phone is, but it wasn't a cell phone. It was your house phone. Just didn't have a wire on it. Anyway, that's over your head. So I'm walking
hot
around.
Stuff.
So I'm in the kitchen. And right off the kitchen is the dining room. And then if you walked from the dining room, once you walked into the dining room, if you walked straight, that's where the living room was. So I am kind of just walking around. I'm not paying attention to really much. I'm just on the phone talking to this girl. And I see what appears to be, for the lack of a better term, a shadow figure. I see a shadow walk past the doorway. And I couldn't make out who it was, what it was. There were no defining features of it. It was just simply a shadow that walked across. And I was like, oh, that was weird as shit. And I didn't say anything, and I carry on with my conversation, and I hang up the phone, and life goes on. Well, come to find out, my parents were in the living room, and my mother is sitting on the couch. Okay, now this is at the exact same time that I'm on the phone, and I see this shadow figure walk past the doorway here. My mother's sitting on the couch. For whatever reason, my father is sitting on the floor with his back on the couch. Don't know why he chose to sit like that. Maybe if you watch this, Dad, you can tell me why you were sitting like that night. And all of a sudden, he looks up at my mother and goes, "What?" And my mother goes, "What are you talking about?" I didn't say anything. He goes, "Didn't you just come in here and ask me to hold something?" And my mom goes, "No, we're watching TV. I didn't say a word to you. What are you talking about?" He goes, "I could have swore you just walked in here and asked me to hold something." And at that same point in time, that's when I saw this shadow figure. Granted, we're piecing together stories here because I have this experience, they have that experience. It's all roughly around the exact same point in time. So he has that experience. He thinks that somebody came in and asked him to hold something. He kind of really wasn't paying attention, thought it was my mom talking to him, wasn't her. And then at the same point in time, I see this shadow figure kind of just walk across the doorway there.
Now, was the shadow figure walking in the direction of where your parents would have been?
It was walking away from them, so it was walking from left to right. Yeah, and so if I'm facing that doorway, right? If I'm facing that doorway, the living room is on my left, and that walked from left to right. So yeah,
ooh, I just got chills.
Absolutely, yeah. So in the same home, right? Now this wasn't an experience that I had; it was an experience my father had. And by the way, my father is not by any stretch. He is not a ghost guy. He's not a horror movie guy. He's just a guy that gets up and goes to work and makes a living and comes home to his family. He doesn't give a shit.
And his name's Guy. His name's Guy. He's a guy.
Yeah, he's a guy's guy. He doesn't care about any of the shit. He's getting up for work. He gets up for work, and he goes in at like 6 a.m. So it's probably like 5 o'clock in the morning now. And we used to have this old crystal punch bowl, right, on our dining room table. And he's in the kitchen. Now, mind you, again, the kitchen's right off the dining room is right off of the kitchen. He hears this strange noise. I was like, what the fuck is that? So he, pops his head into the dining room. Nothing. Stops. Goes back. Just getting ready, blah, blah, blah. Hears the noise again. Pops his head in the dining room. Nothing. Third time he goes back and he's like, what the fuck is making this noise? and he sees the punch bowl, and there's a like a stainless steel ladle in it, and he just moves it, and he goes, "Holy shit, that's the noise I was hearing." So for whatever reason, whether it be paranormal or not, that ladle was moving inside of that punch bowl and making that noise. Same room that I saw that shadow figure walk from left to right. So again, right, you know, I've never seen a full body apparition. I've never heard voices. I've never had a conversation with an entity. But it was weird. It was weird that this happened a long time ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah. Well, something like that sticks with you, becomes a core memory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is, by and large, way more than I've ever experienced. And I think what most people do experience is something like that. Like, you're not generally seeing full-body apparitions. Like, that's generally a little more rare. What's always struck me is there's two types of ghosts you'll typically see. One is like kind of in the vein of your traditional like Halloween ghost, where it's like a white figure, more of like a silhouette of a person, or it almost looks like an old time movie, and you'll see bits and pieces of it. But the other is like a shadow person. And so there's a phenomena called sleep paralysis, where effectively your body is, when you go to sleep, your body shuts down, right? So your brain disconnects a little bit from your body. Yeah. If you've ever like fallen asleep and like kind of twitch and wake up, it's because your body and your brain are a little out of sync. So you might be in the midst of starting to dream and your body moves, and that's what the twitch is, because it hasn't completely shut down and disconnected. Well, what happens in this sleep paralysis state is you awaken, but the rest of the signals don't go down your body. Generally only lasts for a few seconds for the people that do experience it, but could last longer. It's certainly been known to last longer. What happens when you wake up sleep paralysis is you can't move, and sometimes can't blink. And so a lot of people have associated this to some sort of demonic state. Where this gets interesting to me is a lot of encounters that you've seen in this sleep paralysis state, which is scientifically proven. You can show that happens, and it's studied and whatnot. But the descriptions of the beings that they encounter are always very similar. There's the Hat Man, which is like a shadow person that's wearing kind of an old school hat on himself, like a wide brimmed hat. A lot of individuals have encountered him. He seems to be very malicious. Very tall figures that are kind of hunched over, like taller than your room, and then you can kind of see the whites of their eyes and like what appears to be teeth. And then there's the old classic, and now I'm giving myself chills on these, is the old hag, which is effectively you start to feel this pressure on your chest, like something's trying to suffocate you or kill you, and it's like an old woman, but like a witch. Like if you think like the Wizard of Oz, like the witch, like that's where that comes from, is this repeated description of this old hag. Yeah. And when you start in an individual setting, sleep paralysis, fine, we can prove why that happens. It's a chemical reaction of more or less in your brain. But when you start to take all of these occurrences, right, and I'm lining my fingers up, which none of you can actually see, you start to take all these occurrences and you start to tie them together, and people start talking to them, and they're all having the same experiences, especially people that don't, I use the word study, but that's not what I mean, but aren't into this stuff. Like God, your father. He's not into this kind of shit. If he's to come and all of a sudden talk about this experience, that's very odd to me. It's the likelihood of those exact same situations is very, very, very small. If you're reading about it and see it, yes, becomes a figment of your imagination, your consciousness, your lucid dreaming, that can produce those images for you. But when you don't, and you're pulling all these things in, that's where it gets weird. And the repeated interactions in some of the same places that are noted as haunted, that also strikes me as interesting. When multiple people are experiencing, you and your parents all experience something in the same house without corresponding about it until after. That's very odd. It's very unique. And that's where I think there's some credence to the idea of ghosts being real. Yes, it could have been that there's like just a wind shift in the house that day and it spun the spoon around. Yes, you could have just saw like the shades maybe knocked around or something that looked like a shadow figure for you, and your father just probably just was ignoring your mother like most men tend to do to their wives, and like thought he heard something. We've all done that. I do it all the time to my wife.
I do it every night.
I think she said something, and all of a sudden, like, what did you say? She's like, no, I didn't say anything to you. Oh, sorry. My brain just assumed you were saying something, because like It's the important part in the TV show, and you usually talk to me during that part. Yeah. That's why I assume you're saying something.
Or those times where she's still talking, and you, in your mind, you go, "Holy fuck, is she still saying words right now? I have no idea what she said for the past 5 minutes."
God, I hope our wives don't watch this. We're getting divorced. But I think there's plausibility in all of that. Of course, you can't rule out those ideas, but it's when multiple people from multiple backgrounds, from multiple areas, go to the same places, the same place specifically in some of the haunting instances, and they experience very similar things. Could they be spoofed? Yeah. Yes. Are they spoofed all the time? 100%. Like alien encounters. You said it before. Not all of them. Even if 1% is true, even if there's that gap through, there's always somebody trying to monetize something.
Sure.
But when you deal with experiences and it's casual like yours, and ask people people that are listening out there, everybody knows somebody, or you might not know it yet because they haven't talked about it, but everyone knows somebody that's had some sort of an encounter with either somebody in their life that they've spoken to in a dream or encountered some sort of a ghost. It doesn't have to be somebody they know, and they just might not talk about it. But the fact that they're not talking about it and they're willing to open up to you should be some sort of evidence that, like, okay, well, maybe there's more to this thing.
Yeah. Look, if TV ceased to exist tomorrow, or if the ability to make money by being on TV ceased to exist, there would still be ghost stories from now until the end of time. And to me, that's what's so fascinating, right? Not everyone's crazy. Not everyone's full of shit. Something has to be true, right? You talked about it earlier. There have been ghost stories since the beginning of time, going back to ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, right? Those people weren't making money. Maybe somebody just wanted to get a little clout for making up a cool story. Sure, I'm sure some of those things occurred, right? But not everybody's full of shit. A lot of people are, but not everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a soundbite right there. My goodness, well said.
There it is, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed this. Right, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Happy Halloween. This comes out first thing in the morning, so by the time you guys finish listening to this, I hope you're heading out, doing some trick-or-treating. I hope you see just people dressed up as ghosts, not real ones. But do us a favor. For our treat, give us a like, a subscribe, a follow. If you're on YouTube, on Spotify, on Rumble, we're on X, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can find us just about everywhere. Support the podcast. It really does help us out a long way. It doesn't cost you a dime to just click that like, follow, subscribe button, what have you, and share it with a friend. If you liked any of these episodes, this one or any of our other catalog here. Until next time, everybody, enjoy your drinks, play it safe, and watch out for ghosts.